Hey, what's up, Spartan Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Spartan Nation Podcast. Here with your host, Matt Lonsberry, and my co-host, Aiden McCrone. Aiden, it's been a while since we've done this. Almost
Yeah.
2 weeks since our last pod. It feels longer than that to me, but it's
Mm.
good to be back and just talking some MSU athletics here. And yeah, so we're gonna hopefully get a nice audience built up here, and we're gonna take some fan-led questions tonight as well. That's part of the plan anyway. So go ahead and submit those in the comments section. But we'll kind of kick off the conversation here as people kind of fill in. So we'll get started. I think we're going to talk about football and basketball tonight. Thinking about it a little earlier today, I figured we'd start with basketball. There's not a lot of positivity around the basketball team right now, and so I figured we would start with that, get it out of the way, type of thing, and then with football, there's obviously the transfer stuff, the transfer portal stuff is discouraging, but at the same time, it's kind of the beginning of a new era, so that's kind of expected. So we'll get into all of that tonight. But yeah, let's open with some basketball, Aiden, and I'll just lay it out there. Did not see a 4-4 start to this season coming at all. I mean, we talked about it before the year began, and how we were both very high on this team. I think we both had them in as a Final Four, not just contender, but a contender to win the whole darn thing, and they don't look even close right now. So I guess your reaction to what we've seen early on from the basketball program, and again, especially this last game against Wisconsin, where outside of a 5 or 6 minute stretch in that second half, it just seemed like Wisconsin was a vastly superior team in just about every way, and that was really disheartening. So, your reaction to that, and then we'll kind of just dive into it here.
It feels like the wheels are falling off like before December even started, which is kind
Yeah,
of funny. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to put into words because Michigan State, like, I mean, again, historically, it's MSU, like Izzo will figure it out. Whether they lose the Champions Classic or they go schedule a team like Arizona and they lose those two games, you're kind of
sure.
like, okay, that's fine. But then you start off kind of with a stinker against James Madison to open the season, and then you open Big Ten play at home against Wisconsin, and that was just as sloppy could be
Right.
for Michigan State. So I think kind of reevaluating right now, I think MSU is, they're really struggling to find shooting. I mean,
Right.
that's the biggest thing. I think we've been really concerned about rebounding, which has, still been a concern. But the shooting, we kind of, had it in the back of our minds where it's like, hey, they're returning Akins and they're returning Walker, and you add, from what we saw in the exhibition games, they returned, Booker looked like he could be a shooter to make, and he's not even getting in the rotation.
Right.
Akins, you know, Akins has struggled, but Akins can barely get the ball on offense, and you know, Walker has really been carrying the load. They just can't find an identity, and they can't find the distribution there. It seems like Walker and Hogard are taking majority of the load and not really giving anyone else an opportunity to help this team.
Yeah, no, I think we talked about at the start of the year, we had the whole kind of debate between Carson Cooper and Mani Sissoko, who should be the starter, which guy has higher upside. I still prefer Cooper, but it's become pretty clear early this season that maybe neither one of those guys is really that kind of starting
Yeah.
quality center for a Big Ten team who has its sights set on contending. And that's not, again, that's not because I don't like either of those players. It's just because I see them more as like rotational pieces. And both guys, like they flip flopped back and forth as far as starting Sissoko, and then Cooper, and then Sissoko again. And then the last game they start both of them for some reason, and I couldn't. As soon as I saw that online, it was when that was announced. It was like, I don't like that at all. Like there's no floor spacing there with those two guys on the floor together. And Izzo left that lineup in there for like 3.5 minutes, and then started making changes. And it was like, how could you not see that going into the game that wasn't going to work? Now, give credit to Wisconsin, Stephen Krall, the center who had attempted 5 3-pointers all season until that game, and then he goes 4 for 4. But man, like, just didn't understand that choice. Would have preferred. I mean, I'll just throw it out there. Would have preferred to see Cohen Carr get a start at the 4. I know he's undersized, and that is a problem with him maybe on the defensive end. But and at least he helps you in transition a little bit. At least like I've seen him make some plays defensively just purely off of his athleticism. And that's just something that we haven't seen from a lot of other people on the team so far. And so, yeah, there's a lot to work out. You got to figure that at some point the shooting is going to come around at least a little bit. This might not be a great Michigan State shooting team. I don't think it will be. Like, it's hard to say that at this point. But at the same time, I can't imagine that Jaden Akins is going to shoot under 30% from 3 on the year. I can't imagine that Tyson Walker is going to be under, I don't know what his exact number is right now, but under 33% or whatever he's at right now for the remainder of the year. So I think some of that will come along. We also, like, Michigan State will get Jackson Kohler back at some point. Kind of curious to see what he looks like when I can't imagine he's just going to come back and start, because he's going to have to get into game shape and all those things, which is really unfortunate because we saw over the off season and the summer how much he had slimmed down. He looked poised to have a breakout season this year. Looked like he was in great shape. And so he's going to have to work that back. Now, it's one thing about a foot injury. There's certain ways you can condition, I'm sure, but you can't go out running when you have a foot injury. So that's a bit of a concern there. But I am curious to see what he can bring to this team going forward. But yeah, they've got to figure out. I think the biggest and most shocking surprise this season for me has been Jaden Akins, because we saw how good he was, especially at the end of last year. And then he has the decision to make about entering the draft. I think he does enter his name into the draft, and then goes through the evaluation period. And then he and Walker both come out and decide to return to Michigan State. And I mean, we talked about it a little bit. We just thought that he was just going to take another step this year. And that just hasn't happened so far. Now, I do believe the potential is still there. Like, there's no doubt about that. I'm just I'm curious to what's going on with him specifically, just because he was such a big reason and part of why we were so high on this team in the preseason, and it just hasn't come to fruition. So what are your thoughts, maybe more specifically on Akins going forward here?
I think for me, at least, I mean, I'm not there at practice every day. I don't see what Izzo sees, but I think for me, they struggle to score. I think the scoring droughts, every Michigan State team that I can remember has always had issues with the scoring droughts and, the turnovers that happen. But I think a solution worth looking at is just make him the point guard. Just, just off his pure athleticism. He was a point guard in high school. Primary ball handler. I think you got to try every option right now. I think you're just throwing everything at the wall, see what sticks. And I think that's got to be one of the avenues to explore, is make him the primary ball handler. Hogarth already talked about coming off the bench. Malik Hall, like you mentioned, came off the bench last game against Wisconsin. So you have, I think that right now would be my solution for Akins specifically. You have the Nebraska, they go on the road to Nebraska on Sunday, which is a place that, they've always kind of struggled with, where it's like they get some sloppy wins. or they have some bad, a bad loss. But usually it's a sloppy win. So, and then after that, you have finals week, and then you have the Baylor game. So
Right.
this is really a time to, take a step back, reevaluate, figure out something new that's going to work moving forward. I think Akins, Cohen Carr, you talked about, his athleticism being utilized on defense. I think you have to use Akins' athleticism and his kind of scoring on offense to really get this team going, because that's the problem right now is, they had that momentum swing in the second half of the Wisconsin game where Walker comes down and hits 2 threes, and then he kind of gets a heat check when they were down 3 where he had an opportunity to tie it. And then, he misses it, and then the wheels kind of fall off. So figuring out, what those options are moving forward. And yeah, that's really kind of the only option I have to offer right now. I mean, what do you think about kind of the young players? Because I do think Fierce has played well, but kind of, Carr and Booker, kind of what roles do you think they, are they in a right role? Do they need a larger role? Do they need, what do you think can they contribute to this team that's clearly struggling?
Yeah, no, I think that's another key to what this season ends up being, because I think we both kind of anticipated. I think we both tried to pump the brakes a little bit on Booker, even going back to the preseason, just because we knew he was kind of slight of frame. You throw in the fact that Izzo's approach to freshmen is a little old school. I think that's fair to say. And so, like, we tried to pump the brakes on Booker a little bit. I'm still surprised. Like, he did he play against Wisconsin? It feels like he didn't even get. Yeah, he didn't step foot on the floor. I'm surprised by that. Like, I'm surprised by him just not even being a part of the game plan. And that's happened a couple times this season. Like, I would anticipate him averaging like 7 to 8 minutes per game, like at minimum, just because of what he can bring as far as offensively. I know he's got his limitations on the defensive end, but again, just surprised by how little he's been utilized. With Cohen, it seems like he either makes a huge impact where you look up and he's got 10 points on like 4 shots or something like that. And then he'll make those splashy plays on defense where he either gets in a passing lane or he comes from across the paint and swats a guy who's being defended by somebody else. Like, he makes those flashy plays, and then other times it's just like he kind of disappears as well, which I think, again, that goes back to just his I don't want to say rawness as a basketball player, because that doesn't sound quite right, but it like there's a refinement to his game maybe that he still needs to reach that level. As far as Fears, I've been actually pretty impressed with Jeremy Fears. I think he's played easily. He's been the most consistent of the freshmen. There's no doubt about that. And he brings a good intensity on defense. He runs the show well offensively. He's a little bit, of course, this is true for everybody right now. He's not shooting the ball great. Like, he doesn't strike fear into anybody as like a 3-point shooter, but he just is composed and impressive in that sense as a freshman. So, yeah, I think I don't know what the answer is. Like, the one thing about this current stretch that Michigan State is in, so they played earlier this week. They're going to play again on Sunday. A lot of time between games. And then you're going to have another like 5 days in between the Nebraska game and the Baylor game. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is you're going to have a lot of practice time in between those games. Maybe that's enough practice time to get some of these guys like Cohen and Booker more ready to contribute. I don't know. Maybe that's being a little overly optimistic, just because you're not going to, like, Booker's not going to add 15 pounds in 2 weeks. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So there's a limit to that. But yeah, it's definitely, it seems like between Akins and between the development of these freshmen, that's kind of going to be the determining factor as far as what this team becomes. Going back to some of your earlier reports or earlier points about Akins, it does seem like he just disappears for like large quantities of the game. Going back to the Wisconsin game, he takes several early shots, doesn't have a whole lot of success early on, and then he was just kind of gone for the rest of the game. Didn't make much of an impact, and that's kind of concerning. And I see how you like your point about put the ball in his hands, because he does seem like maybe he's just off in the corner standing and
Yeah.
doesn't get, and the ball never comes
That's
his
kind of what
way,
it
and
feels
so
like.
yeah, so um, that's a good point as far as you got to try to get a way to get him more involved in the offense and not just being a spot up shooter, because he's so much more than a spot up shooter. I think
Mhm.
his slashing ability and things like that have just not been utilized this season. I also wanted to talk a little bit about AJ Hogard and Malik Hall, just because I think they're both. Malik Hall is a super senior now, and AJ's a 4-year player now. I think it's fair to say that those guys are who they are at this point,
Mhm.
which is guys who one game will have this massive impact. I think AJ's more so because he is the point guard. He has a more consistent impact, but they're also guys who just have clunker games every now and again as well. And that's, especially speaking to AJ, that's such a detriment to the team when it's your starting point guard. And this program has been so built around that point guard spot, and it's just, I think he was better against Wisconsin. He was part of that 5 or 6 minute stretch there when Tyson got hot. AJ got hot as well, knocked down a couple threes. I think he found Cohen for a bucket at some point during that stretch as well. And so we've seen glimpses of good AJ, if you will, but there's also been a lot of the uh, inconsistency, a lot of the careless turnovers and things like that. So yeah, I don't know it'd be easier if there was like one thing you could point to and say, okay, if they fix this, then this team is gonna, start to get better and become what we kind of anticipated them being. But it seems like there's a lot of different things right now.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think, Malik Hall, like you said, he is who he is. He's gonna have inconsistencies scoring offensively. I think defensively, uh, just kind of figuring out a role for him a little bit more this year because we've seen him at the 3 spot, we've seen him at the 4 spot. I think Izzo likes him at the 4 spot a little bit more. That's where he's played majority of his minutes. So
Yeah.
you have that. They had the two kind of big lineup against Wisconsin, or at least they started with that. And you're trying to play the matchups, I guess. Which I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense because Wisconsin does have two decent bigs, and I think that's something that Izzo noticed and made an adjustment to. But it's really kind of within the style of play for MSU. I think is they are lacking to adjust. It feels like
Yeah.
playing those matchups when those lineup changes are made. It doesn't feel like they've been, they're super comfortable with that. And again, like I'm not there in practice every day, but it it felt like they didn't practice it that much,
Yeah.
to be honest. So yeah, I
And
mean,
then that's interesting because the report was that Hall did not practice like all week, and so you would
mhm,
think that would have been a little bit more.
right.
And again, we're not at practice, but we'd assume that if this was the plan, like I don't think Izzo made the decision to start both centers, an hour before the game started, right? You would think they would have practiced that and
Mhm.
things like that, and I'm sure they did, but it just didn't work out that way. Um, didn't mean to cut you off there, but I
No,
wanted to
it's
like
good. I mean, that yeah, I mean,
expand
there's
upon your
nothing
point.
more than that. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think another good question is, in the post game, which we've heard this in previous years about Izzo is, that he talked about how he's getting soft on everyone and that he needs to go back to his old ways.
Yeah.
And, I mean, what does that what does that mean? Like what does he need to do to kind of motivate because it feels like he said that in the last kind of 2-3 years,
Sure.
and it doesn't seem like the motivation has really changed much. I
Right.
mean, again, Like we see the same Malik Hall that we've seen in previous years. Hogarth took a jump last year, but so far in the 8 games that we've seen this year, it doesn't seem like he's taken the extra jump that we thought he could take
Right. If anything,
in a
he's
larger
regressed a little
role.
bit.
Right. So
Yeah.
I guess like what do we need to see out of Izzo as well, or just the rest of that staff? Because it feels like that's the main issue, because
Right.
like we've talked about, Jaden Akins does not look like the Jaden Akins of last year. Even last year he was kind of the spot up shooter kind of guy, when it's like he's arguably besides Carr, he's their best athlete. So it doesn't seem like things are molding, and it doesn't seem like they're using their strengths to their advantage. It seems like it's more of those, players are trying to fit a certain mold that the coaching staff is, implementing or kind of putting in, instead of the other way around, which I think is part of the reason why they're struggling.
Yeah, no, like your point about Izzo's message afterwards about we're gonna get the shoulder pads out, and I've got to be tougher, and I'm not gonna worry about what the lawyers have to say. I know he's being facetious there and whatnot, but at the same, like it kind of falls on deaf ears a little bit, because we have heard that message multiple times from Izzo over these last 3 to 4 years. And these last 3 to 4 years have not been up to the standard of Michigan State basketball. I think that's more than fair to say. Now, I know what my approach would be as somebody who is probably more old school than my age would suggest, and somebody who grew up playing basketball and is the son of a coach. And I help my dad coach my nephew's high school team right now. So like my approach would be, let's find out who wants to freaking play their ass off here, and let those guys be on the floor. I know, like, it's easier to say than to just put into practice. And there's a limit to that, but like at some point you've got to risk something to try to figure out something that works as well. Like, would it be the end of the world if Cohen Carr gets a start against Nebraska, just to see if his energy and things like that can he spark you at the beginning of a game? Is that the end of the world? It can't be any worse than the 2 big lineup that we saw at the start of the last game, right? So
right.
And slow starts have been something that have plagued this team or this program for at least the last 2 years, if not going back a third year. So maybe switch things up a little bit. Instead of starting Cooper instead of Sissoko, maybe make it one of the change. And I know AJ was benched at the start of a game. Which one was that? It wasn't Butler. Alcorn State maybe, and a game that Michigan State's gonna roll out of bed and win that game. But maybe a more consequential game, giving to your point. Let's let Tyson and Jaden start at guard, and maybe again Cohen is that 3, and so he doesn't have to play the 4, and then you have Malik and one of the bigs at this point. Something to change things up, something to set the tone with your team that says, hey, this isn't good enough. And the effort, I think that was the most discouraging thing about the Wisconsin game, is that Michigan State had a week off, and so all they're doing is practicing, and they come out so emotionless. You know what I'm saying? Like there wasn't that anxiousness to get back on the court. Like as a competitor, when you haven't played in a while, even me, again, I'm using myself as an example here when I probably shouldn't, but like when I haven't played pickup basketball in a long time, I'm excited to get back in the gym and play again. And it just doesn't seem like that is going on right now. And that's a concern, because the grittiness, the toughness that this program has been built on, it seems to be lacking right now. And I didn't anticipate that this season at all.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, they just come out flat. I think that just hurts everything. The momentum swings. It just hurts it all. Thinking about those lineups, you're like, okay, how can Cohen Carr get on the floor? Because there's, how can Xavier Booker get on the floor? Because they could use a lot of their tools. And again, like we've talked about, we know Izzo's old school. We know what he's done with freshmen in the past. For the last few years, I feel like Miles Bridges and Max Christie have been the only exceptions. And,
Yeah.
Cassius Winston did play, a decent amount in his freshman year. I know Nick Ward played a lot out of kind of necessity his freshman year. But, when you throw those guys out there and they know kind of what's at stake and they know that their back's against the wall, I feel like those freshmen who are talented, obviously this was the number 3 recruiting class in the country coming in. So, when you throw those guys out there, they have an opportunity to play. They have an opportunity to prove themselves. It's hard for me to believe that Booker wouldn't come out against, Nebraska on Sunday and play well and give kind of his best effort and give better effort than kind of what we've seen on the floor, because it doesn't seem like the effort has been great at all. Even in their wins. So, that seems like a big issue, which leads to, the poor shooting, which leads to, the lack of defense and the turnovers and just the sloppiness in general. So I don't know. I mean, it feels like there's something kind of underlying that really no one knows about it, whether it's a locker room problem, a dynamic between, the players amongst themselves, or the dynamic between, the players and the coaches. But it does seem like there's something off about this team that, I'm sure it will rise up and reveal itself sooner rather than later. But yeah, it just feels like something's off, and this is, uncharacteristic of, this team, and it's uncharacteristic of, previous Michigan State and kind of what they've built their program off of. And, it seems like we've started to see this kind of deteriorate at a slower level the last kind of 2 years. So well, I mean, we'll see as the season goes on. Obviously, there's only been 8 games played, but the first game of the Big Ten play looked really it looked really bad. And I get Wisconsin's a good team, but there are better teams in this conference, and there are teams who might be worse in this conference, but they play harder and give better effort. I mean, thinking ahead a little, like a team like Rutgers is just going to eat them up because they play really hard. And then, I mean, Purdue is Purdue. Purdue is a machine right now. And, Zach Edey is going to be really hard to defend just with the lack of effort. And you look at a team like Indiana, who's kind of is just another team who kind of grinds, and they have a forward who can really score inside and out. And yeah, I think it's just it's gonna get worse before it gets better. So we'll see.
Right. No, I think we talked about the loss of Joey Hauser and his shooting ability. And I was concerned for this team for that reason. Like, I didn't know who was going to fill that role. But it's had a big, like, not having that floor spacer has had an even bigger impact than I anticipated. And I think that hurts maybe AJ the most, just because I think he's at his best when he's navigating traffic, but some spread out traffic and getting to the rim. And he hasn't been able to do that because Michigan State has not been able to space the floor with the poor shooting. I do wonder a little bit. I'm not convinced of this theory because, again, we saw the slow starts last year as well. But when you fall behind, there's maybe an added pressure to those shots. When you know, okay, we need this, and so maybe that's contributing a little bit mentally to the shooting struggles. I don't know. That's just a theory. But again, that kind of goes back to figure out a way to get off to a better start. Like, how many times this season already in 8 games have I looked at the box score in the first 4 or 5 minutes, and Michigan State is like 1 for 8 or 1 for 9 to start the game, and it's like, man, like it just seems like every time out that's the way that they come out of the gate. So let's tie a bow on basketball, and then we'll get into some football here. And specifically, just to tie a bow on it, like, this game at Nebraska, road game, you talked about, a tougher place to play for Michigan State for whatever reason in recent years. It feels like, even though it's not even mid December yet, it feels like this is a must win game for Michigan State, because you do have Baylor coming to Detroit the next weekend, but that's a top 10 team right now. And so, man, it feels like you've got to go get this one. Number one, you can't fall behind 0-2 in the Big Ten standings. You already dropped a game at home, which we know how important home conference games are. So, am I crazy to say that this game against Nebraska is a must-win game?
No, not at all. I think this is definitely a must-win game. And even the years that Michigan State struggled, they've come out the gates in Big Ten play, swinging heavy. I mean, even the year, 2020, when MSU was in the play-in game, they started off 4-0 in Big Ten play. And we're top 5 in the country, and then kind of the wheels fell off at the end. But I think, yeah, it's got to be a must-win game, and they got to look at it like, this is do or die for them, because if you lose that game and then you go play Baylor in Detroit, they could be 4-6 very easily.
Right.
And that's that seems more, that 4-6 seems a lot more realistic than 6-4. So
yeah,
that's just, yeah, it's very concerning. And I think, yeah, again, you had all that time between, I think it was like Southern Indiana and Wisconsin, and then you had all that time between, or you have all this time between Nebraska and Baylor to kind of figure this out. And it doesn't seem like much has changed. And, the Wisconsin game seemed worse. And, again, there's kind of some like things that we've seen from previous teams from MSU, even in their good years, like, the turnovers and, the scoring droughts, like we've seen that before, and kind of games where they're getting blown out, like the kind of similar to the Arizona game, kind of similar to the Wisconsin game, where they're getting blown out and then they cut it to, a 2-possession game. And then it just, goes back the other way, and they end up losing by 11. And you look at the box score, or someone who hasn't watched the game will be like, oh, well, it didn't seem that, it doesn't look that bad. But then when you actually watch the game, you're like, it was that bad. So
it was worse, than it looks.
Yeah, it was worse than it looks. So we'll see. But yeah, 100%. I think, my last remark on the basketball team is, this Nebraska game is definitely must win.
Yeah, no. So my last thing will be, if we do not see that fire in this game, after the way you kind of got punked a little bit on your home floor in the Big Ten opener against Wisconsin, I think that's fair to say. So if we don't see that energy and that fire, even if it does lead to some aggressive mistakes early on in the game, I'm okay with that. But just like, you got to show the heart, and you got to show the fire and energy, and a little being pissed off a little bit. Like, they should be pissed off. They were preseason number 4, and they're 4-4 on the year. So like, there should be all the motivation in the world to go into Lincoln and just prove it to themselves, if nothing else. So we'll see what that looks like on Sunday. With that, let's transition now into football. I didn't see any questions in the comment section pertaining to basketball. So audience, if you have any football related questions, we're going to move into that segment now. We'll answer as many of those as we can going forward. I think the big topic right now regarding the football program is just all of the activity in the transfer portal. And Michigan State has been the I don't want to say mass exodus, because that's kind of gotten a bad connotation recently amongst the Michigan State fan base. But like that exodus we maybe thought we were afraid to see during the season after Tucker got fired, it's kind of happening now. So Michigan State's up to, I think, 20 players now who have left the program. The majority of those being, scholarship players. You only get 85 scholarships per year, so 20 guys. That's a good chunk of your roster. So I guess, where are you at with this, Aiden? With some of the names, like, obviously some of those names are more impactful than others. And at the same time, This is kind of just where college football is at right now, and I don't like it. I think maybe we'll get into that a little bit as well as we open this discussion about maybe what can be changed about the transfer portal to make it just not what it is right now. So where are you at now with some of the names that you've seen leave the program, level of concern type of thing? Just kind of hit me with all that.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, I think a lot of the 20 guys who have already entered the portal got a lot of playing time. And I think, that a lot of those guys were starters or, started a decent amount of games, not only this year, but last year, last season as well in 2022. So it's just kind of figuring that out. There's definitely a massive turnover that, Michigan State has seen recently too. So this is kind of feels like the second complete roster makeover that we've seen in 4 years. So we'll see where it's going. I think this weekend and next weekend are really big for official visits and, not only transfers, but getting high school guys. Nick Marsh is on an official visit this weekend. Right. I know, they've already lost a lot out of the high school ranks. So, adding those transfer portal players, finding guys who can not only play right away, but, start and contribute consistently. I think that's the biggest thing, because they did see a lot of transfer portal players come in 2022 and 2023, and they haven't turned out to be, who we thought they could be. In terms of guys, I mean, you think of kind of the guy who comes to mind is, Tunmi Sadele, obviously coming from A&M, who's, high rated 4-star recruit, transfers to MSU. And, he was kind of a rotational player, and then he was in the portal pretty much immediately after Tucker got fired, and that portal opened up for a month in October. And, trying to find guys who are, who have experience at other schools, and then, using that experience and then developing them to be better players at Michigan State. And I think that's huge. I know Jonathan Smith has a lot more to pull from right now in terms of Oregon State. I think Oregon State, they're moving to kind of the Mountain West, but they're kind of not in the Mountain West. There's a
scheduling agreement. There's a scheduling agreement between Oregon State and Washington State with the Mountain West, but they're still part of what has now become the Pac-2. It's weird. It's weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they kind of been sentenced to college football purgatory in a way of just you're kind of there, you exist, but you're not really relevant. So bringing those guys over, I think that'll help, because I think as many as they can, and then adding on to that with some key players. I know I've written some things about kind of portal players to look out for, and just figuring that out. I think that's huge. But getting guys on campus, showing these players, showing players from Michigan what this staff is about, showing players from Ohio that they care about them, and that they're trying to make an effort to get back into Ohio and kind of rebuild those ties that they lost the last few years. And then just adding that up, and really just the willingness to compete, and just what they have to offer is playing time. I mean, I think that's the biggest selling point for Michigan State right now is, you have an opportunity to play and, prove your set of skills. And the staff, from what we've seen so far, I mean, they haven't, finished their staff, but they have majority of their offensive staff ready. They're still working on the defensive staff. I think they only made 2 defensive hires so far. They're still trying to find a defensive coordinator. So just figuring that out. Once the staff is complete, I think we'll see in January, we'll see a lot more guys come in. But I think right now in December, it's kind of starting from square one is kind of building off of this right now, kind of with the official visits happening this weekend and next weekend.
Right. No, like one of the things that's really jumped out to me now that I'm actually covering a coaching transition for the first time in my brief career doing this, but like I've always heard different people talk about how the calendar for college football doesn't make any sense. This has been like a perfect example of that, like seeing it up close now with Michigan State, just because Jonathan Smith gets hired. And he got hired pretty early on in the process. All things considered, he has to put together a staff. He has to meet with the current players and try to figure out at least have those initial conversations. Try to keep the ones that he wants to keep, if putting it that way, but also he's got to recruit the next high school class. He's got to salvage the 2024 recruiting class. He has to navigate the transfer portal himself and find out, okay, who can we bring in to supplement like it's just crazy the amount that goes into just a couple weeks into this transition. There's so much to do and so little time to do it, just because of the way that the calendar is set up, with the transfer portal opening like a week or so after the regular season ends. And then they don't have bowl prep, so that's one thing off the table. But like, think about these programs who, Oregon State, for example, who they won a bowl game, or they achieved a bowl game, and so now they're going through the transition of that whole thing and having to prepare for a bowl, whatever's left of their roster. That's a whole other topic about bowl games nowadays, which I have my thoughts on that as well. But it's really chaotic. And so I guess my point is, like, preach a little bit of patience here and just let this kind of play out, because right now Michigan State has 20 players into the portal. They haven't brought anybody in from the portal yet, but that's going to happen at some point. There's 12 days between now and National Signing Day, and so we'll see how much of Michigan State's 2024 recruiting class can be salvaged at this point, which I think the guys who are still committed at this point, I feel pretty good about those guys. Nick Marsh especially, he's locked in, dialed in. He's going to be a Spartan, which is a good first step, if you will, with that regard. But there's so much to do in so little time. I'm not. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, like, all of these departures that have happened over these last 10 days or so. I'm not panicking about that, just because it's just the way college football is nowadays, and that's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. I will say there's a few names that entered that caught me by surprise. Zion Young was definitely one of those, the defensive end, sophomore, who has been, I think he started most of the games this year, if not all of them, and played a lot as a freshman as well. Derek Harmon is a guy who both of us really like. Three receivers: Jerron Glover, Tyrell Henry. We haven't talked about the quarterbacks. We probably should do that, since it's one of those things. You and I talked about different scenarios. This was back before Smith even got hired, and just looking at well, what if this guy stays and those two leave, or these two stay and he leaves? And like, I don't think we talked a whole lot about the potential of all three leaving. Like, that kind of caught me by surprise. Didn't anticipate that. So since we haven't addressed that on our pod, let's talk about that a little bit. At this point, we know the reasons why Sam Leavitt decided, hey, this isn't the place for me. He's got a little bit of a negative history with Jonathan Smith, being an Oregon native and not getting an offer from Oregon State. I think it's easy for us now at this point to look, okay, well, Oregon State got a commitment from Aiden Childs, and so they were probably done with that recruiting class. So that's why that happened, but there was some hurt feelings over that, and so there goes Sam Leavitt. I wasn't terribly surprised about Noah Kim, just because he lost his starting job midway through the year. It did seem like Katon Hauser had overtaken him, and again, it's all from the lens of the previous coaching staff, but it did seem like Katon Hauser had kind of taken that job, that role, and so I wasn't terribly surprised by Noah Kim entering the portal. But I think maybe if the one, not knowing what I didn't know about leave it before that whole thing happened with his history with Jonathan Smith. I guess the one that is most surprising now is Caden Hauser, just because he did get that opportunity to start the back half of the year. I think he would have gotten an opportunity to continue to be Michigan State starter. So I guess what's your take on the quarterback situation here? Because we know Aiden Childs is on a visit right now, and that would alleviate a lot of the concerns, not all of them, because you got to have more than just one guy in your quarterback room. Right. But like, you talk me through that a little bit.
I don't think we could have, I guess, planned for the whole Sam Leavitt kind of, we couldn't have planned for that. Sure. I think the Caden Hauser one is a little bit interesting. Like you said, I think he did get a little bit dealt a bit of a bad hand. I know coming out of camp, we did talk about the Noah Kim versus Caden Hauser kind of situation. And maybe he felt like he won the job coming out of camp. So it just gives him another opportunity to, or I guess he's looking for an opportunity where he can be the guy without, looking over his shoulder. And that's really kind of what it is. Sure. Noah Kim, kind of like you mentioned, it's not that we didn't, or it's not that we expected him to leave, but again, it wasn't super surprising that he left for, those various reasons. So I think, Aiden Childs, I mean, it feels like MSU is really banking on him to come, which a lot of people do think he will. So there's confidence that he will come. But it's figuring out the rest of that quarterback room, like you said. So, right. You're probably going to have to take, one, if not two more quarterbacks out of the transfer portal. So you're trying to figure out, guys who are willing to kind of be a backup, because Jonathan Smith is familiar. He has that relationship built with Childs that, he wouldn't otherwise with another quarterback. So you're kind of recruiting a guy to be a backup and come in and compete for a job that, realistically he's probably doesn't have a good chance of winning. And then, you're recruiting kind of, freshmen. You're recruiting, I know Henry Hasselback decommitted from Michigan State. So there's that. So I know MSU has started to offer some more guys. I think, if Childs is the one transfer portal quarterback, you go out and get two, incoming freshmen, and that's risky, but you're banking on dealt, though. It's really just the cards you've been dealt. So it's figuring out that situation. It's not the greatest situation. You would have hoped that one of those guys would have stayed and kind of given a competition. But it does feel like it's Childs. I know, when Dante Moore entered the portal out of UCLA, he's a Michigan guy. So, they thought he would have a chance, that they would have a chance with him. But, he's going to want a starting job, because sure. he started, I think it was 7 games at UCLA as a true freshman. And, he struggled at times, but he showed why he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. So he's gotten interest already from schools like Ohio State, LSU, Michigan. So he's gonna want a starting job. And Michigan State, really, it doesn't seem like they're gonna be willing to offer that if Childs is the guy. So it's a risky situation. I think they'll have a better understanding come January, just when the staff is settled down. I know they already have their quarterbacks coach, they have an offensive coordinator, and they have they have Smith, who kind of helps lead the offense as well. So I think in January, when the portal is kind of, guys have started to commit places, and you're kind of, you have guys left over who are still looking for landing spots. I think that's when you go out and get another transfer quarterback. And then, come signing day in February, I think, you'll see, 1, maybe 2 more quarterbacks, because realistically, even though MSU had 3 guys, it still felt like they were running thin at quarterback. And that, that's the Mel Tucker situation throw that aside, it still felt like it was thin because, most programs carry 4. I know just with the transfer portal and stuff, I think 3 is kind of the new standard. But yeah, you still have 0 right now, and it feels really bad. So it's figuring that out.
Yeah. So a couple different things. Childs being on campus this weekend, obviously, that's great for Michigan State, and obviously. Jonathan Smith and the other offensive coaches, they're going to have an inside track there as far as getting Childs to come to Michigan State. And I think we both feel pretty confident about that right now. My one concern when it comes to Childs, though, is just the fact that he's so highly regarded in these different, transfer portal lists that you've seen out there. That there's going to be some other programs who make a pitch as well. Like quarterback's a hot commodity. And so until it's like announced, hey, I'm committed. And even frankly, unfortunately, and nowadays, like even if he does commit, like that's not the end of the battle. Until we're into spring practice, it's almost like, that's just the way that things are nowadays. But no, I do feel good about Michigan State's chances of landing Childs. They'll probably have to fight off some other offers that he's going to get from other programs. But to your point, like it's going to be really hard to land 2 transfer quarterbacks who both think that they are going to be the starter. Like that's just tough to do. Guys who are leaving to be the guy somewhere. Not that they're going to shy away from competition, but like to land 2 of them and then to keep 2 of them will be difficult. You mentioned Henry Hasselbeck losing that commitment. It's not like he was some high 4-star kid, but again, you need depth at this point, and there's no depth right now. I think Keys to Wisdom in the comment section talked about how you add a high school guy and then a priority walk on type of guy to kind of fill out your room a little bit for this first year anyway. As far as the transfer thing, like I think ideal situation is you land Childs. It's kind of a rarity, it seems like, but like a situation that kind of comes to mind from a few years ago was when Michigan landed like Alan Bowman out of the transfer portal, and he came in and didn't hardly play, but he was like a depth piece, and he stuck around for 2 or 3 years in Ann Arbor, and then he hops back in and goes and starts a year at Oklahoma State. That would be.
And they added Jack Tuttle this year too as well.
As a backup. So like something like that where you just find a guy who's looking for a new situation and who is comfortable holding the clipboard for it seems rare and seems weird, but there are some of those guys out there, and so you got to go maybe find one of those in addition to a Childs or another QB1 type out of the portal. So interested to see how that whole thing plays out. Again, it was kind of a shocking thing when all of a sudden you realize this team doesn't have a quarterback, but that's not going to that's going to be something that solves itself over time going forward. Not that, not necessarily next year is going to be a great depth wise or anything like that, but like you're going to have a quarterback out there next fall. So looking at other things, you mentioned that you've written some things about potential guys that they could add. We've talked about Childs. Who are some of those other guys for Michigan State who they are interested in right now, looking at, maybe have those Oregon State connections, or maybe other guys outside of the Oregon State kind of footprint? Your thoughts on that as far as potential transfers could be brought in?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote an article, I want to say a week or 2 ago, about potential Oregon State guys. I mentioned tight end Jack Veiling, I want to say. He's also on an official visit. Either I think he's this week, or
I think
he's not this. Yeah, he's this week. So he was their tight end at Oregon State. He was their main guy. And I do want to say another thing about Veiling and Childs is they're both going to be sophomores, so they still have a lot, multiple years of eligibility left, which is kind of important. Which could also go back to adding another quarterback could be tricky, because you are assuming that he plays for them for at least the next 2, if not 3 years. So there's that, and then I want to say his first name's Easton. I totally forgot his last name. It's hyphenated. It's like something Arnold. He's a linebacker. He also entered the transfer portal, I think yesterday or 2 days ago. So having somebody like that, a linebacker that you can pair with Jordan Hall, who, from our knowledge, should not be a concern to enter the portal. He seems to be all in as well.
Right.
For at MSU. For the future. So figuring that out, I think the wide receivers were a bit surprising, seeing Tyrell Henry and Jerron Glover leave. So there is another player from Purdue, wide receiver Abdur Rahman Yassin, I want to say is his name. He was a rotation, or he started for Purdue, but was kind of a guy that was just in the mix. I think he only had 320 yards, give or take, this season. So he has good experience. He's going to be a grad transfer. He's taking an official visit next week to MSU. So that's another name to look out for. He's another guy from Michigan. He went to Walled Lake Western. So that could really help assess that problem in the wide receiver room, because I do think I think the consensus is, I think, from most Michigan State fans, is that Courtney Hawkins is a good coach. And
Right.
the consensus is that he's likely coming back as well. So you have that, tie with Nick Marsh, and, the development that he's brought, since he's been here in 2020. So you have that, again, having another Michigan guy. I think a big thing that they've really emphasized so far is that, while most of the staff has been on the West Coast, that they do want to, sit down and tie roots in the Midwest, and that they're not going to be some, crazy national brand where they only take one or two guys from Michigan and then they go dip into California and Washington and Oregon for the rest of their guys. They're going to create this team around, the state of Michigan, the state of Illinois, the state of Ohio, which has been, MSU, when they're at their peak, has been, what their culture is, and kind of been their roots and how they have achieved the most success. So I think that's really important to look at. I know their tight ends coach, I don't remember his first name. His last name's Wozniak.
Ryan.
Ryan Wozniak. He's from Ohio. He played at Wisconsin. The defensive backs coach, Blue Adams, who is, highly regarded. He's from Florida, but he played at Cincinnati. So he has, he's familiar with the state of Ohio. I know he's been out recruiting lately. I've seen pictures on Twitter with him, with current commits, as well as kind of top targets as well. So figuring that out. I think that's really big, but assessing that offense is the biggest kind of assessment that they need this off season. And we saw the defense take a kind of a jump last season. I would say they did take a jump. I know they struggled against Ohio State, Michigan, and Washington.
Who didn't?
But yeah, exactly. But they did well, or they held their own in the rest of the game. So it's figuring out how they can revamp that offense to the style of Jonathan Smith's play. The style of ball that he wants to play, which is physical. He wants to run the ball a lot better than they have before. So figuring that out. So I think that's going to be really interesting moving forward. So they have some pieces. I wouldn't say they have like a ton, but Nathan Carter, from what we've heard, is still staying. Figuring out that quarterback. Their tight ends room is already pretty full. I'm sure there's going to be some guys leaving, but they still have Malik Carr as well. So kind of building around the few pieces they have on offense, and then kind of molding it into that kind of a little bit more old school, but somewhat nuanced kind of offense that Smith likes to run.
Yeah, no, I think to your point about, establishing those roots in the Midwest, I think in this first, certainly in the transfer portal, as Smith and his staff try to bring in as much help as they can to supplement the roster, you're probably going to see some of that West Coast, like you probably see more West Coast guys maybe brought over this cycle, and I think that could be true for the recruiting, the high school recruiting ranks as well. Like, um, Oregon State has suffered, several decommitments with the loss of Smith, which is to be expected. How many of those guys can he and his staff kind of convince to, hey, take a look at Michigan State? And it's a long way across the country for a lot of these kids who maybe Oregon State was recruiting, but like you at least put the flyer out there. You've made the connections, you've built up the rapport with those recruits, and so I think this year, this cycle, you'll see. Maybe a larger portion of the class be, West Coast guys. I'm interested to see what that will look like in the years to come. I think if it's way too early to look ahead at 24 because they don't have a quarterback for goodness sake at this point. So like it's way too early to look ahead. But I guess what I'm getting at is I think depth is a major concern right now with the roster, which that's going to be that's going to be something with most coaching changes. There's a reason why the previous regime didn't work out, and then you throw in the transfer portal. So depth is a concern. As we've kind of gone over the hour mark here, so let's tie this in a knot as well, Aiden, then we'll get out of here. But I guess this isn't a very pleasant question, but I feel like it's a reality of where things are at right now. Should expectations for next year be lowered at this point, just because of the amount of the roster that we've seen get turned over at this point? The fact that we know that even if Michigan State does go out and land an Aiden Childs, like there's going to be some limited depth at the quarterback spot. You also have lost, 6 offensive linemen to the transfer portal. That's a big chunk of your offensive lineman group, and that's a position group that Michigan State has struggled with depth going back several years. And so there's some areas of concern here. So I know when we initially talked, we had kind of that goal of being like try to get back to bowl eligibility 6-6. I know a lot of the fan base wants more than that. I do understand wanting more because these last 2 seasons have been a rough watch, but like should we lower expectations a little bit just because of all the work that has to be done between now and next September?
And not to mention just the schedule. It feels brutal because there, you have you go to Maryland week 2. You play at Boston College, who isn't the greatest team, but it's still, I don't know if I can't say Power 5 anymore, but I guess a larger school on the road. And then after that, you follow it with Ohio State, at Oregon, Iowa, and at Michigan. So that really makes it rough on Jonathan Smith in year 1. But I think a bowl game should still be. It's doable. It's doable, but it's not going to be easy. I think that's really what it's going to be. I'm interested to see how they utilize the transfer portal. I'm interested to see kind of what kind of avenues they go down. Do they look at more of kind of some, high level FCS prospects maybe, or are they trying to go get kind of 4-star players who, didn't play immediately as a freshman at, an Alabama or a Georgia that, they go and get that they think is going to develop into, a high level player who's already been recruited by high level schools. So I'm interested to see with that. I think I'm not going to say anything right now because my predictions have been atrocious, I would say, for football and basketball, to say the least. So I think right now, I'm not gonna say anything or put anything in stone, but I think we'll have a better idea come January when, assuming they, fill, losing 20 guys, assuming they fill probably somewhere around between a third and a half of those scholarship spots, and then kind of adding on to that recruiting class out of high school. So I think that gives a better idea of it. But I'm interested to see kind of where they go with the portal as well.
Right. No, we've got to see what the roster looks like going into spring practice, either
Mhm.
in typically in mid March, and so there's still what 3.5 months, I guess, between now and then. There's going to be a lot of movement between now and then there is as we saw last year, there is a spring transfer window after spring practice. That's when Keon Coleman and Peyton Thorne and briefly Charles Brantley entered the portal at that time. Brantley came back, got hurt earlier this year, didn't play most of the year. Now he's back in the portal. But
Mhm.
so we've got to see what that looks like before we can have even any idea at all of what maybe the team will look like next fall. So no, we're not putting a number on it. I just was speaking more generally with how much of a rebuild is going on. I just felt like it's important to temper expectations a little bit as well. And even in Jonathan Smith's own career, uh, we saw that it took him a few years to get Oregon
Mhm.
State built up into a team that was notable and in a fringe contender in the Pac-12. And the Pac-12 was very good this last year. Like they went 8-4. I know
Yeah.
that's a step down from the 10-3 they went a season ago, but the Pac-12 as a whole was so much better. Has gotten so much better over these last couple of years, and this year just really good football over there this year. So give the guy some time. The transfer portal does make rebuilds a little. They can make it quicker and I don't want to say easier because it's not easy, but like they can speed up the process a little bit. So I'm anxious to see what that looks like. But again, I do think it's important to temper expectations, let the staff get established, let them build, and try to build it the right way, because we go back to that 2021 season and a lot.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that was not built the right way, but it was built on the back of one guy being an All-American,
Right.
and that's kind of a very once in a lifetime type of season
Right.
where one guy is just that special and turns things around so quickly. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Aiden, any other final thoughts, I guess, either basketball or football that you've thought of as we kind of close things out here?
No, I think we covered all the bases right now. I think, with the official visits kind of happening the next couple of weeks, I think we should be seeing a couple commitments kind of soon within the upcoming weeks. I'm not gonna predict who it may
Sure.
be, but I do think we will see some just based off of those visits, and then yeah, again, kind of heading into Christmas, we'll see where Michigan State basketball is at.
Right.
If they've improved, if we see some better effort out of them. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
Yeah, I'll say for football's sake, I mean, going back now is 3 months, really. If you go back to the start of the whole Tucker situation when that news broke, it's been 3 months of mostly bad headlines for the football program. I think
Mhm.
that's fair to say. And
Yeah.
then even like the 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 hiring process was what it was, and you and I both agree. We thought Michigan State landed on a good candidate, and then we're anxious to see what Jonathan Smith is able to do here. But then immediately after they announced the hiring of Smith, then you got this wave of transfer portal stuff, and so it's been a lot of down and negative headlines. But I do, to your point, I think we're going to start seeing some positive headlines again now
Mhm.
under this new regime as they start to land some commitments. From the high school ranks, from the transfer portal, and the building part of the rebuild will begin pretty soon. The teardown, I think, is going on right now, and maybe we're towards the end of the teardown portion, and then the building blocks will start to get stacked. So, with that, we appreciate you guys tuning in. As always, you can find more of our content here at our website. It's part of the Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Network. You can find us right there. We're also on Facebook. You can see that at the bottom of your screen. With if I can get rid of the tag there, I'm Yeah, so Facebook's down there at the bottom of the screen, and then YouTube, our channel, and then us on Twitter as well. So what were you gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say this is the first podcast in a while where my internet didn't go out for at least a minute. So I guess
the positive vibes are already coming back, man.
We're gonna take the wins where we can get them.
Yeah, there was a couple of sections there where we got a little jagged, but
really?
hey,
okay.
But we didn't lose your.
It's a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction. Maybe we'll see something similar on the gridiron going forward. So, all right, guys, appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time on the Spartan Nation Podcast.